My name is Darby, and I am a PhD student in conflict resolution at Nova Southeastern University. This is from a presentation I gave at a humanities conference at Nova recently, well, within the past year, and I thought it was important to note that things that are going on in our country, in America, um, stem from a theoretical stance of structural violence. So this presentation goes over what structural violence is and um, how we can address it. The presentation was a workshop, so I had audience participation where we brainstormed ideas and had conversations going. So please reach out to me via social media if you feel like you would like to be a part of the solution to this problem we're facing. First of all, we're going to learn what structural violence is, then we're going to see examples of it in America, and then how to change structural violence from the inside out. So, if you've never heard of structural violence before, Galtung um, kind of spearheaded it, and this graphic shows we're very familiar with cultural violence. Mass shootings would be direct violence. Domestic violence, where there's physical things involved, is direct violence. But structural violence is more on the invisible side. So it's basically anything that a belief system, really, it's a belief system that people hold that stop other people from reaching their full potential. So I will go through some examples of this in this presentation, but a quick example would be the court system. People go into it thinking it's going to be fair and just, and it isn't always that way. Depending on your gender or the color of your skin, you might get treated differently by judges, by police, by educators. So that, in a gist, is structural violence. Our country has a long history of separating children from parents. Most recently, we've seen this with the immigrant camps where children are being separated. We see it with foster children being separated from their parents. We see it in family court. It goes way back to the founding of our country, where slaves bore, children, and they were separated from their children. Indians were separated from their children. So this is not a new thing. This is one example. It's been going on in our country since our country started. Another example is mass incarceration. So if you're not familiar with Jim Crow laws, I highly recommend reading the book, The New Jim Crow. This example is based out of Florida, I think, where I am located, and it shows the number of, actually this is the United States, it shows the number of inmates, based on whether they're white, Latino, or black, and black people are incarcerated at a much higher rate than white people are. So this is an example of how law enforcement or judges or whoever else could be in the system are putting the needs of white people in front of the needs of black people, preventing black people and Latino people from reaching their full potential. Just a small example. Another example is educational inequality. Not all schools get the same amount of funding. Some funding may be based on school grades, and if you have students that live in an area where there's a lot of poverty or violence or single mothers, if it's a minority area, they're not going to get the same kind of funding that a wealthy area would get. They don't have the same opportunities. Not all students have internet connection at home. They don't have the same kind of resources. They can't afford tutoring. So it's not going to attract the same kind of teachers that would be drawn to a wealthy, high-ranking area. These are just a few brief examples of structural violence, and I'm bringing this up because when we talk about it and people talk about gun violence in America, it's important to know the kind of conflict theories that might be in play here. It's not a mental health issue. It's a power and control issue. And the majority of people in the past few years that have been, committing these mass atrocities have been white males, and they had previous histories of domestic violence. So could it be structural violence? Because if they'd already been approached by police for past transgressions, if they'd already been through the court system, what could have been done to prevent this? Is the court system protecting them because of their race, because of their gender? These are the kind of conversations that we should be having. So what do you think that you can do to change structural violence from the inside out? I started a company, Trauma-Informed Solutions, where I'm trying to get, research on adverse childhood experiences and trauma, and how it affects the brain and learning, and research on structural violence into the court system so that decisions can be made based on actual evidence-based practices that are used other places in the world. Let me know what you think. What can we do? How can we approach this? What kind of conversations should we be having to change the belief systems? On an ending note, Riane Eisler wrote a book called The Chalice and the Blade, Our History, Our Future. She grew up in the Holocaust area. She experienced it firsthand, and she did actual research looking at past histories of different cultures all over the world, and found that, we're either going to be dominated, or we're going to work together towards equity and partnership. So which one is it going to be? Are we going to continue a pattern of domination, of power and control, or are we going to work together towards equity? Let me know what you think.